13 days, 3 rounds of talks, but no change in the situation on ground. But the big concern right now is Sumy, close to the Russian border, where 9 people have been killed in fresh bombing today. This comes even as Russia announced a ceasefire for safe evacuations. Remember, Sumy is also the city where nearly 700 Indian students are still stranded since the first day of the invasion, after yesterday's failed evacuation attempt.
Военный, ну, бывший военный пенсионер. Мне слезы бегут. Жену осколком вчера поранила. В 4-ке лежит, 4-ки кое-как спаслись. Сейчас она там, я здесь. Пытаюсь что-то наводить порядок какой-то.
Мы прятались в гаражах, и попал снаряд. Прямое попадание в голову.
Понимаете, как всех пациентов, которые поступают и могут ходить, конечно, все хотят домой к своим родным и близким. Вот. А те, кто не могут идти, те, конечно, остаются здесь. Мы, к сожалению, таких почетов не ведем просто. Понимаете? Когда больше, когда меньше. Так что...
Now, as Russia continues to escalate war on Ukraine, a united West has issued a stern warning saying that Russia will bear increased cost of the war. US President Joe Biden held a video call with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The global leaders affirmed their determination to continue raising the costs on Russia for its unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine. They also underscored their commitment to continue providing security, economic and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. And for more details, let me go across to my colleague Maruf Raza, who is joining me on the broadcast. Maruf, thank you so much for speaking to Mirror now. So we're seeing continued shelling. You know, we've seen time and again Russia announce ceasefire, but despite the ceasefire, there seems to be no, change on ground. Each time they announce, they declare a ceasefire, but there is constant shelling again. Do you think this time they will adhere to their commitment?
You see, the ceasefire that is being announced is from place to place. It is not all-encompassing. It doesn't cover the entire Ukraine, and it doesn't mean there is a complete end to hostilities, because that's only going to come about when a final agreement is hammered out. Secondly, shelling is taking place to essentially continue to weaken Ukrainian resistance, which continues to be very strong, courtesy the bold, courageous stand of their president, Mr. Zelensky. But please remember, there are many international experts who are of the view that with the force levels that Russia can still bring to bear, and Ukraine is fighting at the end of its reserves, whatever assurances they get from Western countries about equipment and support, Ukrainian forces, by reports on the ground, have been stretched to their limits. And there is only a few more days strong resistance they can put up under the current circumstances. But Russia, with all the resources it can bring to bear, can only increase the tempo of the operations, which I think they are likely to do over the next 2-3 days, particularly with large columns of tanks, armored vehicles, and others still standing around Kyiv. There is also the view that Russia is steadily encroaching into Ukrainian territory from the northeast, east, and southeast. So systematically isolating at least 20% or even 30% of Ukraine from Western support once Russian troops are well entrenched out there. And that at least serves Putin's partial agenda of having a kind of buffer between Western NATO and Russia in Ukraine. But I think the bigger objective of President Putin has been all along, but not clearly stated as such, is complete control over Ukraine, because Ukraine is probably the second largest country in Europe and has massive resources in terms of grains, minerals, titanium, rare earth, and other items like uranium, which the Russians would like to control so that their economic and strategic heft increases. Back to you.
Right, Maruf, stay with us because we have some more updates related from the conflict zone. In fact, as we mentioned, that the fresh ceasefire has reignited evacuation hopes among 700 students stranded in Sumy. Yesterday, they came very close to escaping the violence-hit city. They even boarded the bus sent by the Indian embassy, only to be told to get down and go back. They were told it was too late to start the journey as the ceasefire would end soon. Today, once again, attempts will be made to evacuate these students, and for that, 2 safe passages have been made. And while this is happening in the conflict zone, we're also seeing multiple sanctions, more and more sanctions by the West. We're seeing several foreign brands as well continue to pull out of Russia and continue their economic boycott. On this angle, Maruf, I'd like to come back to you. So, Putin is no novice. Before he started the war, do you think he did consider the worst of the sanctions by the West? Because there is no stopping for the West. They have announced once again today, Biden said that they will go more strict with any economic sanction. So do you think he calculated the worst of it, or was it a serious miscalculation on his part?
No, certainly he would have calculated, but it wouldn't have been entirely the kind of calculation that would have served him well, as we are seeing. There would have been a certain element of miscalculation. I think miscalculation has been on 3 fronts. One is on the severity of sanctions that would be implemented by the West. Please understand that both in the case of his invasion of Georgia and his invasion of Crimea, there were sanctions that were announced, but not as serious and as severe as the current case. The second miscalculation was the level of resistance that his troops would or may have received as per his assessment in Ukraine. They had assumed that they'll be able to roll past, and they enjoyed a lot of support and constituency for Russian control of Ukraine right across the people of Ukraine. But as is evident that mostly Western and Central Ukraine would like Russia not to control them and would like to be part of Western Europe because of the economic benefits that Europe provides them. And thirdly, the estimate by Putin and his commanders on what his military capabilities can achieve against a resistance of the sort that they thought they might have had in Ukraine has been, again, as yet at least, a fairly gross miscalculation. So all that put together, they have to go back to the drawing board because Mr. Putin has a lot at stake. If it all comes to a standstill and he hasn't achieved what he promised, I think his presidency would be seriously endangered from an internal coup, and the US and their friends are trying to encourage resistance people within Russia to kind of remove Putin. It is a possibility. The second is there could be an uprising within his military, which has already suffered many more losses than they thought they would have if you go by the figures that are coming in by Ukraine. And if the military resists or stands up in resistance to any further orders to move into the cities and suffer more casualties, this could be an embarrassment for Russia and a big blot on his hand. You know, militaries fight when they feel they have a great chance of success, or to defend their motherland, or for a just cause to take over another country which is under massive dictatorial rule, like in the case of Germany under Hitler. None of those objectives currently seem to appeal to the Russian military in the Ukrainian case. So there is a good chance that Putin could run into trouble. So I think by the end of this week, they would like to show some dramatic achievements and results. Otherwise, it could turn out to be a long drawn out urban conflict which can suck in troops and never give you results. The US and the West wants that to happen. Putin would not like that to happen. But if it were to happen, the end sufferers will be the people of Ukraine.
That's right, Maruf. The end sufferers indeed will be the people of Ukraine, just like they are suffering right now. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective.